Hello and welcome to What the Lux with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anand Sharma.
Together we lead Matter of Form, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services.
The world of super yachts and those who own or charter them is an area we haven't looked into before on the show. Fraser is the largest luxury yacht service provider in the world, with over 230 employees and 20 offices around the globe, and key locations including Fort Lauderdale, Monaco and Sydney. Fraser's CEO, Anders Kurtén, is an inspiring leader with 30 years of management experience and a regular and spirited keynote speaker, lately most often on the topic of sustainability, luxury marketing, the ultra-high net worth in this segment, and the future of the maritime industry. And it's of course a hot topic. On the one hand, as Anders himself has previously said, a super yacht is the ultimate expression of freedom, and they're in the business of delivering dreams. But you're also talking about the big issue of sustainability and responsibility, as well as owners who are only a micro percent of the world's population, yet who control a large percent of the world's assets and wealth. Anders, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's great. It's a really great topic, this, and we're delighted to have you. I actually wanted to start with the first question for you, which is, it's seemingly a truth that every sort of tech billionaire or multi-billionaire wants to go to space, but every majorly wealthy person tends to buy at some point a super yacht. Why, or at least spend a lot of time on them? Why is that?
Well, I was speaking at a panel discussion in Amsterdam last fall, and the moderator Martin Redmayne, who's quite a well-known character in the industry, he'd actually done some research because apparently he'd been spending sleepless nights thinking about why do people want to charter or own super yachts. And now I think you'd expect the answers to sort of range around, well, it's really one of the best ways to spend quality time, if you will, with your family and loved ones while living in the lap of luxury, equaling that of a 7-star resort. And if you want to, waking up every day at a new epic destination. But what he'd found in his, I guess, somewhat unscientific, more qualitative research was that the actual foundational driver, if you will, was far simpler than that. And I think it relates back to something you quoted me on earlier, which is that most people have this sort of atavistic need for freedom. And really what Martin found to be the fundamental driver was a far simpler one than the one that I talked about earlier. It's just people tend to just love to be at sea. And, in some ways, the sea is the same for everybody, whether you experience it from a kayak or a super yacht, even though the sort of the vessels and the sizes and the amenities offered, they vary. The sort of foundational driver why people do want to, mess about in boats, as one of your British kids' books authors once said, is really what's at the root of it.
Yes. Who was that? Was that Arthur Ransom or?
It actually wasn't Arthur Ransom. I think it's from Wind in the Willows, isn't it? There's nothing half as much worth as messing about in boats or something like that.
Of course, and I've seen a picture of you messing around in a very small aluminium boat, which clearly you hadn't parked very well that day.
There you go. That's my illustrious past coming back to haunt me, isn't it?
Yeah. So just we'll obviously return to the bigger themes of the industry, but I'd love to know what's you've got a really interesting background. You've obviously also just recently come from a yacht building company, the unbelievable quality. But what drew you to the industry? What do you love about it?
Well, I think for me, sort of, I've grown up as many people in the Nordic countries have a sort of second home, which is significantly less luxurious than you would expect from the words. We had a summer cottage in the Finnish archipelago, so I've been messing around in boats of the both powered and sail variety ever since I was a kid. So after my concluded studies at the Swedish School of Business Administration in Helsinki, I spent a few years working in IT, but then sometime in my early 30s sort of woke up to the reality that this is actually life. It's happening now. It's not a dress rehearsal. So that sort of drew me to look for something that had a perhaps more personal personal meaning or connotation for me than just building early websites for sort of Web 1.0 clients, as it was at the time in the late 90s. So I ended up after joining Accenture as my final sort of endeavor to do a real job, if you will, jumping off the rat race for a while. I went to wooden boat building school and then actually restored wooden boats for a couple of years, which was emotionally highly rewarding, financially slightly less so. So in the mid 2000s, then found myself running a small yard building semi-custom performance sailing boats in southern Finland, and then it's really been onwards from there.
And what's it's in the blood somewhat, but what is it that you love about the industry and where you are now? Because I suppose also you're dealing with a very almost supranational industry. It is by definition quite global and transnational.
It's by definition definitely global, but I think by and large it's about the people, whether clients or the people that you work with at the company that you're at, or the people that you work with at other companies, required to sort of provide the full suite of services that, for example, super yachts require. I find that although many have different paths from mine, everybody's united by, to some degree, a passion for the subject and just for being at sea. So there's this unifying factor which gives the industry, which is quite small in terms of numbers of actors, and even if you look at the numbers of transactions on everything but the charter side, it's actually quite limited. So there's a little bit of this feeling of a cottage industry to it.
Yeah, just talking about Fraser, it's a very interesting company with sort of long and deep roots starting in the US. Can you just talk a bit about Fraser and the history of that company?
Sure, we really go back to 1947 and the west coast of the US when David Fraser founded Fraser Yachts, really initially around helping clients both sell and buy yachts, and then as sort of leisure yachting, leisure boating grew in popularity in the sort of post-war years, the company grew with that. The next significant step in the development of the company really came in the early 90s when a group of European yacht brokers at the time came together and actually bought the rights to the name Fraser and the Fort Lauderdale operation. This was I think 92, 93, somewhere around there. And you got to remember, this was at a time when usually it wasn't European companies acquiring American ones. It was quite the sort of, opposite way around in general. And that was really founded on the vision of these four partners, that this business to evolve and to succeed is going to have to do other stuff in addition to buying and selling yachts. The fundamental sort of raison d'etre or reason for being for a super yacht services company really fundamentally is to make the life of the owner or charter as easy as humanly possible. So they had the vision of adding on other services, selling the dream in bite-sized pieces, if you will, with retail charter brokerage. You charter the boat for a week or two or four or six or whatever. And then in addition to that, yacht management, which is a more technical sort of suite of services, really essentially to simplify taking care of everything related to the asset ownership that the crew doesn't take care of. And then organically sort of followed on also dealing with the crew, recruiting them and training them and keeping them up to speed, as well as the more sort of safety related aspects of running the yacht.
Yeah, I know, because it might appear simple what you do, but if you scrape beneath even a little bit in the surface, it's actually phenomenally complex, the things that are going on in Fraser, in a way, given the complexities.
If you think about a bigger yacht, you take, for example, something in the 70, 80 meter size range, it might have a crew of 40 people because, 20-hour on rotation, 20-hour off rotation. And it has an ecosystem of subcontractors and suppliers around it. It's actually, in a sense, it's a small to mid-sized company if you think about the scope of the operations, whether it's the financial side or whether it's the sort of human resources side of it. So yes, you are right. It's once you go past the sort of 70, 80 foot mark, when the yachts start needing permanent crew on them, it sort of changes the nature of it quite significantly. And then the bigger you go, obviously, the more exponential the complexity of the ecosystem surrounding the asset becomes.
Yeah. And why did you take on the job, and what is it you're hoping to achieve as CEO of Fraser in your tenure?
Well, I think previously running a yard, Baltic Yachts, probably the premier builder of performance-oriented sailing super yachts in advanced carbon composites. That was a pretty small micro niche within a niche all of its own. This was essentially 10 to 15 contracts annually that it made sense to even bid on. And if you closed on 2, then you were pretty much set in terms of the order stock. So there was kind of a limited dynamic to that. Plus, when I joined Baltic in 2019, it was essentially a pure strategic and financial turnaround case. So at the completion of that, I think it was a pretty good time to move on to the services side, which has significantly more churn. There's more things you can do with the business, because the addressable audience is so much bigger, if you will. And being owned by MarineMax, obviously the end goal ultimately is world domination on the sort of super yacht services side. But then when you sort of trickle that down into what does that mean for the grassroots, I think when you're involved with services, once again we come back to the fact that it revolves around people, and services can't be manufactured and put into a warehouse and then taken out when the demand comes. Services are always produced on the spot. And you need to figure out a way to hire the best people, then retain them and facilitate creating an environment and a sort of internal ecosystem where they time after time again can exceed customer expectations, whatever they may be. And they do vary quite wildly if you compare across the sort of business areas that we cover. If it's sales brokerage, obviously it's pretty technical, and it's highly sort of focused on finding a buyer or a seller for the asset. If it's charter retail, then you have this intense period of the 2-week charter when everything has to sort of run perfectly and smoothly. If it's yacht management, it's much more technical, and making sure that the operations run smoothly, and from a technical and safety perspective, the asset is on spec and so on. So it's an interesting suite of services.
It certainly is. Is there unifying traits amongst your employees, or are they wildly different people who maybe just share a love of the lifestyle or of the sea?
Well, I think we have something like 25 different passports and over 30 different languages spoken amongst the staff. So obviously there will be a wide diversity, which, has to be said, since by and large, to me, actually, the whole sector operates in an environment of extreme scarcity, if you will. Because, depending on where you put the sort of size cutoff, we have some 6,000-7,000 yachts in the entire super yacht fleet, and for all intents and purposes, they're all unique assets, unique yachts. The owners, for sure, are great individuals in their own right, and every charterer's dream, although there are sort of commonalities, but there's a lot of differences as well. So it's really this sort of extreme diversity combined with a significant scarcity that makes it interesting.
And on the client side, some of the world's most interesting people must come into your orbit. You must meet fascinating people day in, day out.
That is definitely one of the perks of the job, is to hear these stories sort of firsthand. But then again, discretion is a really, really big part of what we do. So there's precious little of those stories that I'm at liberty to share.
I'd love to know actually what the charter versus buy dilemma is. Are there patterns as to who charters, who buys? Is it surprising, or is it very obvious? Because it's a wildly different thing, I guess.
I don't think there's necessarily a clear pattern there, and just to set the record straight, there's significant crossover as well. There's yacht owners who also charter regularly if they have a bigger bigger party that they want to spend a week or two or 3 or 4 with, they might charter a couple of additional yachts to cater for those additional people, or if there's a significant milestone in personal lives, such as a big birthday or anniversary or some celebration. So it's not like it's sort of clear-cut line between ownership and charter. I guess in many ways what we saw during the pandemic, which really sort of trickles all the way down, not only into yachts, but also into boats. The whole industry had been sort of trying to figure out what's the silver bullet to get more first-timers out on the water, whether it's in a Boston whaler or a 60-meter super yacht. And generally, globally, the sort of first-timers tend to represent something around maybe 10% of the clientele in any sort of average normal year. But during the pandemic, that ratio jumped to a third. So we saw a huge influx of first-timers, both buyers of boats, buyers of yachts, but charterers as well. And at the same time, we saw the sort of average age drop pretty dramatically. So sadly, we figured out what the silver bullet is. It's a global pandemic. Now, hoping that won't happen again. I think it still taught us some pretty valuable lessons. And one of the big trends that we see, which sort of transcends both charter and ownership, is that more and more the clients today, they expect to sort of take the lifestyle that they live ashore pretty seamlessly on board their yacht. So there's more focus on well-being areas. There's more focus on open social spaces, whether it's the beach club or just the sort of deck spaces of the yachts. There's more focus on wellness, which then again trickles down and translates into sort of what types of requirements we have for crew competencies. So a deckhand who can, play the guitar and sing a song and mix a mean martini while also, running a Pilates class is actually not that uncommon to see.
I did have one micro question, but it's always fascinated me. Is there a dynamic of the crew who work on these yachts? Because you're essentially giving up, your 20s, your 30s, or sometimes your whole career to be half the year on one of these boats. And it must take a certain time of person or philosophy, because they're incredible people, very, very talented. Who are these people who go around the world as crew?
I would almost venture to say that while they may be giving up some of the sort of regular working hours and the perks of a more traditional shoreside job, an overwhelming majority of them feel like they're gaining something significantly more. Now, obviously, you have to be multi-talented. Obviously, you have to be service-minded to cut it, but you also get to see some pretty epic destinations and partake in some pretty extraordinary adventures that are for the very select few, if you will.
Yes, yeah, I can understand. Yeah, zooming out to, I think the big topic, something you speak about a lot, but can you talk about the industry in terms of responsibility and sustainability? Probably the things which would be top of mind for people who don't know that much about it and might throw your way.
Well, I think we live in a really, really exciting time in this industry because technology has taken such quantum leaps over the last 10, 15 years, partially driven by developments on the automotive and mobility side. But not only that, I mean, the stuff that is feasible today in terms of reducing your environmental footprint of your yachting life are actually on a completely different decade from 15 to 20 years ago. And that's actually, if we go beyond the lifestyle that we talked about a moment ago and the changes there, that is actually one of the biggest changes. If we just look at the sort of new build yachts in construction today, is the systems and technological complexity that these advances in various disciplines, allow us to effectively utilize, not only to increase the quality of life on board, but also to significantly reduce the environmental footprint of these activities. And I have this really sort of simple four-step program or plan where those who choose so even on existing yachts can actually significantly reduce the impact. And the first one is to switch from regular diesel to a synthetic fuel called HVO, which will immediately slash all your emissions by up to 70-80%, all but particle emissions. Yeah. The second step really there is to try to visit harbors and marinas that have green shore power, because most of these assets spend more than half their time tied up to a dock, plugged into shore power. And if that shore power is from a environmentally sort of responsible source of electricity, that significantly further reduces the impact. And the third one is just to accept the fact that when you cruise, go slightly slower if you knock a knot or a knot and a half, a knot being the nautical equivalent for speed. It's about 1 knot is 1.8 kilometers per hour, and just above 1 sort of highway mile in terms of speed, which is inconsequential in terms of the time spent on the water on an average cruise. All other things being equal, you can significantly slash your emissions. And the fourth one is really just continue to educate captains and crew that were mentioned before on circular and responsible sort of operations on board, and that can per yesterday significantly slash the overall emissions of the entire sector.
And I mean, it's really exciting, that stuff, but I wonder how far, and perhaps this is an ignorant question, but how far innovation can go. Like, for example, could we see an entirely renewables and electric powered super yacht in the not too distant future?
I do believe we could, and the yards who are most technologically advanced are actually making wonderful headway there. We already have floating big hydrogen yachts on the sailing yacht side, having been involved in a few of those projects myself. I've been personally involved in launching sailing super yachts in the 140, 150 foot size range that are full electric, which means that as long as they are sailing, they are virtually zero emissions, because they can recharge their battery bank off the energy that the sails generate in terms of the movement of the yacht. So yes, there are infinite possibilities.
Yeah, which ironically goes back to the sort of late Victorian era, when that was the experience as well, wasn't it? When it was just pure sail.
Yep, there you go.
The same sort of vibe. And out of interest, which countries house the real expertise in this area in terms of yacht building?
Well, I think you would go to probably the Netherlands, Germany. Finland is quite far ahead if you look at the sailing sector, and then Italy. But Turkey has been growing a lot over previous years, and they are quite technologically adept at the yards there as well. So that would probably be the 5 countries that I would list.
Yeah. Is there anything? Is there a trend in fractional ownership of yachts? Is that something you're seeing? We're certainly seeing it in the wider luxury industry, but
I think there's a little bit of that, but to me, it doesn't really compete with ownership or charter. It's a little bit like if you think about the sort of communications revolution, where first we had Gutenberg with the printing press, and then a little bit later on we got radio, and then we got TV, and then we got video, and they didn't really, in essence, replace each other. They just came in as complement, more of the same. So I think in terms of one more point of entry into the industry, and I think it's actually not a bad thing. But is it ever going to replace full ownership, or is it ever going to replace charter, which is essentially, piecemeal? I don't think it will.
We were casting around a few smaller questions, which you're very well positioned to answer, which I think our listeners will be interested in. I think the first one actually, just obviously last year there was the tragedy of the I might mispronounce this, the Bayesian, Mike Lynch's yacht, the Bayesian, which, for those who don't know, obviously sunk in a storm in a sort of black swan event, which I think no one could predict. But has that had an effect on the industry, or do people see it in context?
Well, I think, first of all, related to that, what I'd like to say is that our hearts and thoughts go out to the deceased and their family and friends. It was a terrible tragedy that should never have happened. Now, with that being said, these types of events are exceedingly rare, and if you look at ways of circumnavigating the globe safely, any properly built yacht, whether of the sailing or the powered variety, is an exceedingly safe way of spending time with family and loved ones. And I think on that specific incident, while the investigations are still ongoing, maybe I'd like to refrain from further speculations as to the root causes. By and large, in general, I think the sector takes safety exceedingly seriously. We do a lot of work with both owners and captains and crew to sort of retain the stringent levels of safety required on board, both from a regulatory perspective as well as just from a general good seamanship perspective, right? So that's something that hasn't changed really over the last 200 years.
Yes. Yeah. It does seem, just speaking to people about it, the most phenomenal bad run of coincidence, that event, rather than anything systemic. But I did also wonder, just zooming out as well, you personally, what are your favorite places to sail in the world, on a more positive note?
Well, sort of beating the drum of Finland a little bit, the southwestern archipelago is an epic area. What many people don't know, because the climate is kind of inclement and the season is kind of short, that's actually the area in the world that has about 1/3 of all the navigational markers in the entire universe. So that's how rocky it is. In terms of geographical footprint, it's actually almost the size of the Greek archipelago, but it's a really well-kept secret because, as said, the season is very short and the obstacles are prohibitive in terms of navigation. That's definitely, it's the area I grew up in. It's the area that I know like my pockets. So that's definitely a favorite cruising ground. I really enjoy the Caribbean. I love the Greek archipelago, and that's the great thing I think about life in general, is that the universe is so vast. There's always new things to discover. So looking forward to discovering the next.
Yes, which brings me to the question, the place that you haven't been on a boat that you'd most like to go to.
I would really like to visit the Whitsunday Islands in Australia, as well as do the Red Sea coast on my own keel, because I was just there for an event in October and had the chance to do a scuba dive, and it is just pristine and extraordinary. And it's not a huge exaggeration to say that that's an area of the world where nobody's really been in any meaningful way since Jacques Cousteau in the 70s.
A few of our clients run cruises to the Arctic. Is that somewhere you've been and experienced? I think that's a really interesting side of being on a boat, is experiencing some of the natural world like that.
It is, but having grown up in Finland, scraping car windows, shoveling snow, and in Finland we still have national service, so I spent half a year of my life camping in the woods with my army buddies. I'm kind of, my quota for cold climbs is, at least for the time being, pretty filled up.
Yes, no, fair enough. And in terms of maritime or sailing heroes, are there any people who stand out for you?
Well, there's a French sailor called Bernard Moitessier, whose books I read when I was in my formative years, who participated in one of the first solo sailing races around the world, but then for personal, philosophical, ethical, moral questions, once he'd completed the round, actually he dropped out of the race and did another half turn just for fun. He's one of my early heroes, and then obviously I grew up reading Joshua Slocum, so he's another one who sort of overcame not having a lot of knowledge about transatlantic passages at the time in an epic way. Then there's actually a significantly less unsung hero whose name is forgotten in history books, but he was in the early 1900s he was a captain of a small fishing vessel on the northeast coast of the US. He was originally from Finland. Every summer he would sail his own boat back to Finland to see his mother, and then sail back for the winter fishing season.
Amazing. And that's an autobiography or a
There's never been a book written about him. This was actually a story that I heard when I was at Baltic Yachts, because he was a guy from the area, so that's sort of local folklore. But I thought that was a pretty extraordinary family love right there, combined with some pretty epic sailing adventures, I'm sure. And those, in a way, they're the most interesting stories, the ones that you hear from word of mouth.
Yeah. And then my very last question before the outro questions: will Britain ever win the America's Cup? This is for our British audience.
I do firmly believe they have the talent. Was that a good diplomatic answer?
A very good diplomatic answer. Yeah. So we always ask our listeners the same questions at the end of the podcast, the same 4 questions. So if it's okay, I'm going to put you in the hot seat.
Absolutely.
You may have sort of covered these before, but I still think it's relevant. The first question is, what would you most like to change about your industry?
I think we're on a continuous mission to do 2 things: figure out a way how we can further elevate the client experience, whatever business area we're talking about. We're working very, very hard, but the world is changing very, very quickly. So that's definitely a challenge that we need to get even better upon. And I think the second one, sort of, which is more really continuous work of education and sort of rinsing and repeating the same types of arguments, is around all the stuff that you can do already today to decrease the environmental footprint, because they're fundamentally what we need to do as an industry is to show that we can self-regulate so that we don't get subjected to third-party regulation, which is going to be in the short run highly disruptive.
The second question is, what most concerns you about the world we're leaving the next generation?
Well, I think for now it would be remiss not to say sort of, overall geopolitical stability, and obviously Finland sharing a 1,340 kilometer land border with Russia makes it in a way even more personal, if you will. I mean, 10 years ago, if somebody had told me that we're going to look at Italy as the poster child for a well-functioning European democracy, while at the same time having Finland and Sweden join NATO, I would not perhaps have believed that statement.
I would really agree with that. It's deeply depressing, that side of things.
Well, but then again, fundamentally, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and I find that being a pathological optimist is really a great asset in this industry. So I'm pretty sort of trusting humanity in general is pretty resilient and inventive. So I have a pretty positive outlook in the long run.
Yeah, and it's worked so far. We must remember that.
There you go. And the world is still a better place now than it was 50 years ago, and it's continuously improving.
Yeah. I love this question, and particularly for someone in your position. If you had to give up your job tomorrow and you couldn't work in this industry, what would you do?
That's a great question. I would probably tinker around with vintage cars.
Right.
Because I find a lot of sort of the same. I like working with my hands, and it's also, in some ways, they're similar traits. It's a labor of love, if not a passion. So I think I could find challenges on the automotive side.
Great. And the last question is, what's the most exciting thing for you in the next 5 years?
Well, you know what? When younger staff members or younger people just in general ask me about career advice these days with this many miles on the odometer, I usually sort of tell them that, look, when you're 25, you have this grand plan, which sometimes is quite detailed, both for your professional life as well as for your personal life. Now, in my humble experience, the only 100% definitive thing is that it rarely goes according to that plan on either side of the fence. But you know what? It can turn out okay anyways. Just, first of all, embrace the serendipity, and second of all, recognize the meaningful forks in the road as you approach them, and maybe accept the fact that you will not have full 20/20 vision on what's the right decision, but you need to take that decision anyways. So that was sort of a long preamble to the thing that generally excites me the most these days, is if I'm able to provide a platform for younger people to sort of spread their wings and get airflow under their wings, and if I can help them succeed in some way, shape, or form, then I've done a pretty good job as a manager.
Wonderful. Anders, thank you so much for joining us today and for that tour de force of the super yacht and maritime industries. So thank you, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Fred.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Lux. You can find us on socials at @Reform, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLux. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matchreform.com and chat to one of our consultants.